Well, I load for, must be like 20 different cartridges, but I have never had anything give me as much trouble as a Swiss. Now you can see this has got blue on it because I think I finally got one that'll actually chamber. But it's been a battle. You know, the main thing I think, the main problem I run into is these things are really well made. The tolerances are really close, which is all well and good, but for a military rifle, that can be a kind of a problem. You know, where I was running into trouble, I was having trouble getting them to chamber, you know, and this odd mechanism, you know it right away if the serial number doesn't pop to the top, you know, that they're not going to work. But that's what the blue was from. I've been using that to figure out where it was actually interfering. You know, I ended up, what it is the chambers are very tight. And the rifling starts really soon after the brass. So if that bullet is out even just a hair too far, it hooks in the rifling right away. And if you don't, you know, if you hit it and it doesn't close all the way and you try to back it out, it'll pull the bullet out and dumps powder all over inside. Twice I did that. But I think I got her set back far enough now, and it seems to close. But it was an aggravation. You know, like I said, the chambers are tight. I ended up on my sizing die is a lead die. I ended up shortening the bottom of the die by 10 thousandths so that it pushes the shoulder back a little because it wasn't doing enough of that too. It was interfering there and it was interfering here. Just been a little aggravating. And this PPU brass, I immediately stretched after, you know, the PPU, the factory stuff fed through perfectly fine. I had no trouble chambering it. But the brass immediately stretched. And so I had to shorten the brass right away. And then, like I say, I've been having trouble with the die set pushing that shoulder back far enough, but I think I got her now. But it's been a bit of a circus. And I think part of it is, you know, you're using a 308 bullet. But I think the actual bullet is a little bit under 308. You know, I think if you had something like a 307, because, like I said, that rifling gets right up there, and you can see it'll make marks on the bullet. Or if it's too far out, it'll grab it. You know, there's no margin for error there. And it isn't really, you know, when it goes to chamber to make that last turn to lock, if there's anything interfering with that at all, she hangs up. But I've run a few different attempts at it. But it's been quite a circus doing it. You know, I'd work on this for a while, get a little frustrated, and then I'd work on the Winchester because the Winchester's great. I've had a lot of fun with that. I'm going to do some shooting with that later, but see, if that serial number doesn't pop up on top, you know you're going to have a problem with her. But these are the Hornady 168 grain with that scrawny little hollow point. Yeah, see, these chamber good, so I think I'm in business now. And she's got to be hitting real close. But I wanted to take this out and do some long range stuff, but I had to get this chamber issue sorted out. But I think I got her now. Yeah. But it has been quite a journey. Yeah, this is hard for me to get used to this mechanism. Part of it is I'm trying not to eject them out on the ground. But that seems to work now. But I had to anneal the brass to make sure I could get it to go back far enough, even after I ground that die down. But I don't, a lot of people are shooting these, but I don't know that many people that are reloading for them. They're generally just shooting the surplus, which I think is pretty reasonably priced, but I would still reload if I can. But it's an interesting gun. But I noticed, when I was shooting the other day, I was shooting that PPU stuff, and it was shooting low then. So I have my sight set on the 200 meter mark, which I might have to drop that back down again now, but I'll see where these are hitting. They got to be real close because I could hear the grater blade clanging. But interesting gun. Just a little different getting used to that bolt. But it sure made a difference, fighting to get them to chamber. But, every time you see somebody shooting reloads of these, you see them watching real close to make sure that thing. Well, the good thing is if it doesn't go, if it doesn't go all the way and make that twist to make the lock, if it's not completely, the trigger won't fire. Well, it will there because the bolt just slid. But if you've got one in the chamber and it's not all the way over, it won't fire, because if it did, then it wouldn't be locked and it could come back. But so it's good, it's safe in that way. But it was aggravating when I would, end up with one that would get the bullet stuck in the rifling, and then you go to pull it out again and dump the powder inside the gun. But I think I got my die set where I need to be now. Well, I'm going to play around with this a little, and then I'm going to play with the Winchester some, because I've been having a lot of fun with this gun. This is a blast. You could really rattle them off. And I have 3 different loads actually. I loaded those jacketed bullets with 17 grains, and they hit hard. They're a good shooting. But then with these lead ones that are that 357 that I sized down, I've been loading 14 grains, and they work flawlessly. I haven't had a single problem with them. What I did do, though, is I loaded some up. I had shown the other day that I had some 9mm that I sized down. I thought they were 95, but they're 104 grain. And I loaded up some of those. I think 10 of them. And I did have one malfunction with them, and that was only because, there isn't enough resistance from that light bullet. The bolt went back and ejected, but it didn't go back. It went back far enough to eject, but it didn't go all the way back, so it didn't pick up the next cartridge. But that was at the 14 grains, so if I jump that up to like 15, 16, 17, I'm sure then it'll be just fine. But it was funny. They shot perfectly well and they were accurate and everything. But the funny part is then, it slows everything down. So when the bolt come back, it'd make a kerclunk. It wouldn't. I don't think it was actually going all the way back. Is the thing. It wasn't going back to the buffer. It was just going back as far as it needed to eject that one out. But it was funny because it just a kerclunk, kerclunk. You can feel it moving slow. So I'm right at the minimum there at that 14. That's why for that I'll jack them up. But these bigger bullets, they've got enough resistance. It worked just fine. Fun to shoot. My brother was up and shot it a couple times, or 5 or 10 times. And he couldn't get over that odd feel because the recoil on these is like nothing else. It's that delayed because of that heavy bolt. But interesting to shoot. Well, I want to check my target and play with this some more and see where my sights are because I want to get out in the big pasture yet before they get the cattle up here. But I think I got a workable load for this now. And this is that 48.95, which was what was recommended, so I'll try it though. Likelihood is eventually I'll go to one of my other powders, 4064, that I tend to use on a lot of things. But at least I got that whole feed mechanism, or to get it so it'll actually chamber them, because it was having a great deal of difficulty. Like I say, very tight, very close tolerances. Kind of surprising in a military gun that it would be that finicky. But it's precision. Unlike a Mosin, or unlike this Winchester. I tell you, this thing, it's funny when I get the empties, when I pick them up, when I have to resize them, you can see that case is greatly expanded. It takes a little force to resize them to bring it back down, because I think they've got a very loose chamber in them, because they're just throwing them in there and throwing them back out. Things are happening real fast, so there's not a tight fit there. And I did notice when I used those 9mm, I had a little gas blow back, and that's, well, you can see there's a brown or black around here, because it wasn't enough resistance with that light bullet to expand the case out all the way. So I've got to up the power on them, but that'll work. Fun to shoot, but just weird, that recoil is just so different from anything else, but fun gun to shoot. Just really, really interesting to play with. But I better get playing with this Swiss. I have a little enthused now that I actually got something out of the chamber, because it's been a lot of playing around. But like I say, I modified that Lee sizing die. I cut 10,000 off the bottom of it so that I could get it to go further onto the cartridge, and push that shoulder back. But that is the one thing I really like about the Lee stuff. All their dies and their molds and stuff, the stuff is cheap enough that you can play with it. If you have to modify it, no big deal. The most it's going to cost you is like $20. It's not a big risk in doing it, whereas some of the real expensive stuff, you don't want to play with them. But the Lee stuff, you can play with that all you want. You can almost get another one.